So a community solar array, at least in the New York definition, is a solar farm that's interconnected to a utility, let's say National Grid. And it generates dollar credits with every kilowatt hour that it produces. Those kilowatt hours are applied against a rate, which in New York is called the VDER rate, the Value of Distributed Energy Resources. And that's what generates its dollar credits. In order to access its dollar credits, it has to sign up subscribers to its community solar array, and it has to leave a certain amount of its dollar credits with those subscribers to benefit them. And then the balance can be sent back to the solar developer or asset owner. Being able to take that product and focus it on commercial end users, again, it's like a novelty, and that's where our focus comes in.
That was a brief from this week's conversation, which is around solar projects for commercial and industrial sector and community solar. Stick around, it is going to be an interesting conversation. Hello and a big warm welcome to yet another episode on the Mission Shunya podcast. I hope you are doing well. First things first, we are just 2 episodes to 100. A special one is coming up. If you have any feedback that you want us to consider, do drop a note, we will consider that. Well, when I say we, it is also with the support of our friends at Terra Generation, who are behind the cover arts for every episode. They are a content agency specialized in telling stories in climate, biodiversity, and sustainability. And when I talk about feedback, a few listeners write to me at missionchunya@gmail.com and usually ask about a particular topic to be covered. One such topic was community solar. It is a concept that is popular in a few countries and in particular in a few states in the USA. So when I got to know about the work of a company doing exactly similar work, I was curious to know more, which led to this conversation. So who's our guest and what does Catalyst Power specialize in?
My name is Gabe Phillips. I'm the founder and CEO of Catalyst Power, and we are a decarbonization platform focused on the middle market and independent commercial and industrial business owner in the U.S.
So before we get started with discussing about your entrepreneurial journey with Catalyst Power, I think you've been in the energy space for a little longer time before that. So what motivated you to get started and start Catalyst Power?
You're right. I have been in the energy business for a bit longer than Catalyst has been around. I started in 2005, right out of engineering school, working for Sempra Energy Trading in Connecticut. And while I was there, I did a couple of different stops in operations and IT, and then ultimately traded all of the power markets in North America from Canada to Mexico. And that job as a trader was to take risk in the markets for profit. And while I was there, a lot of interesting things happened in the financial markets and legislatively in the U.S., and the world's conversation about climate change really kind of got kicked off. And we had, the introduction of the ITC for solar and wind and the PTC, and that, sort of gave birth to a whole new group of power plant developers that didn't really have a lot of background in using the markets to meet their new business needs. They came from like every other walk of life, besides having a background in the markets. And then at the same time, retail deregulation, so like retail choice, where a customer could choose its supplier other than the utility, started to expand. And there was just a whole host of new market participants that didn't really know how to ask for what their needs were and define their needs and use the market to shut it down. And so I actually left trading for profit at that time. This is like in 2010. And I set up an outsourced trading desk or an energy management company to help all these new natural participants, address the business needs that they now had using the market. But I always wanted to take that expertise and background in traditional trading and, not just get paid for a fee for service, but focus our efforts, at least with some amount of our time, on the renewable development community to help it not be a cottage industry, help it really grow with sophistication. And there I was fortunate enough to market power on behalf of about 2,000 megawatts of installed renewable capacity. Because of that work, they locked in revenues and were able to finance a lot of renewable generation throughout the U.S. A lot of hydro, solar, wind, some biogas, and that was all on the upstream side or the producer side of the market. And on the downstream side, we did risk management for retail providers. Those who were convincing customers to switch away from the utility, to choose other options. So we addressed both sides of the market, but also in that unique seat, we got to see like kind of all the good, the bad, and the ugly. That both of those types of market participants were experiencing and perpetrating out there. And while at GP Energy Management, that was the name of the company, I got to see that there was a pretty big gap in decarbonizing the middle market or independent commercial and industrial business and end user.
Nice.
So I really wanted to focus on working on that. And so I sold that business to a market data and analytics provider called Genscape. Stayed on for a few years for an earnout, and I left in 2019 to work on that exact problem.
Wonderful. Now, the entire journey, I think, was also coinciding with what was happening around the deregulation in the markets, and I think that kind of aided you to to focus on the commercial and industrial sector, right? I think that was market was really opening up in different regions.
That was the earlier phase of deregulation was for commercial and industrial end users, and so that sector of the end user world had earlier and deeper adoption of retail choice than the residential sector does, or did and still does, at least in the Northeast. However, there was just such a focus of a large proportion of retail energy companies were focused on residential consumers. That they at one point, I think I was really noticed that residential consumers had more choices. Business owners had more choices at home than they did for their businesses for product design and different choices. And I thought that was perverse, but I also noticed that the same thing was true for their renewable energy options. There were more renewable energy supply options for residential consumers than they were for independent business owners. Now, that doesn't mean that the very sophisticated commercial and industrial end user didn't have every option they could dream up under the sun. They did. And there's lots of focus on that end of the market, that end of the spectrum, the very large, very sophisticated, very creditworthy end user. And there's lots of focus and lots of attention on the residential consumer, just because of the mass, the high volume of customers that you could address. But that middle independent business owner, with still significant amounts of consumption and really a group that drives emissions in the U.S. fairly significantly, was not being focused on at all. And there's a lot of good reasons for that, but that is what I noticed as deregulation was maturing, that it wasn't maturing for the middle market commercial and industrial customer.
It is also interesting that the middle market that you're mentioning also, I think, if I'm right, accounts for about 50% of the energy consumption. Am I right?
Yeah, it's a little higher than that. I think it's closer to 60% of our domestic energy consumption, at least in the US.
Okay. So after you started Catalyst Power, so how did you go about addressing this gap in the market, and what unique solution did you come up with in order to attract these players?
Well, the novel route that we decided to take was be relevant to this customer for a variety of other reasons while we seek to decarbonize them. We wanted to make it as easy as possible for the customer to enter into a conversation about their energy consumption with us. And we thought that the best way to do that would be, be their energy supplier first. That is like already a very fragmented market, the retail supply markets, specifically one focused on the independent business owner. And so, my decision was aggregate up a lot of those retail energy companies, roll them up, acquire them to get closer to their customers, so that we have information about them. We know how they consume, what their costs are. We know where they are. We have access to their credit history and payment history, and come to the conversation about decarbonization as prepared about their energy consumption and their profile as possible. These are customers that are busy running their businesses. They don't have a 12-person procurement team that's focused on driving sustainability goals, right? They're just trying to run their business.
Correct.
And so their attention spans are short. Their focus on economics before sustainability is a huge challenge to surmount. And we needed to make sure that we were going to remain solvent throughout that lengthy sales cycle, as well as come to them, halfway up the learning curve. about who they are and what their needs were. So that's how we chose to address the problem and get in front of these customers is, first provide them with a service that's essential and then let them know that, for no additional cost and only a modest amount of work and time, we can implement some sort of decarbonizing solution for them.
That's interesting. Can you briefly run us through this process with an example? Like, for example, I understand from your case studies that you help them reduce in their energy consumption. But what would a typical transaction with a C&I client be like?
I have a good example. I'll anonymize it, but it's
Sure.
let's just say it's a farm in upstate New York, right?
Okay.
This particular farm is in a retail electricity contract with us for many years.
Okay.
We had a community solar array that somebody else owns that we were hired to aggregate subscribers for. And we subscribed them to that in order to start receiving a 10% discount on their costs. And that's like a baby step towards decarbonization. And we are now developing a 250 kilowatt solar array on their rooftops, which we will sell about 20% of their energy consumption to them from that array.
Mm.
They'll continue to consume the balance of their needs from the market, just like they were before. And they'll continue to have their community solar subscription, saving them 10% there. And then we are also going to finance the installation of EV charging stations for them. That is a customer that's leveraging 4 different solutions from us. The first one being regular way retail energy supply. And that's, that's sort of point in fact, that's how we became relevant to them in the first place. And why we knew how they consumed and where they were and what their costs were. And it was easiest to move them down the spectrum of decarbonization with a community solar subscription first. And then the more complex and more impactful product later of hosted solar is what we started to work on afterwards. And now that customer will be a consumer of 4 different products from us. And I think that that's a great example of how we can work with the independent business owner on their schedule with, their level of attention and ability to focus on this and give them, multiple bites at the apple to continue to move themselves down the spectrum of more complex and more impact on their emissions.
Very interesting. Now, how do you get people associated with community solar? I mean, internationally, we do hear that US has a big market for community solar. So how does a typical transaction and what are the tenures that you operate these projects on?
Well, probably worth taking a step back and just describing community solar at like a high level for your listeners, because it is a unique construct, and and it's not even available throughout all of the country. It's only in certain states where the state has put together this regulatory construct that permits it.
Correct.
And New York is a great example. Their community solar market design is the most elegant that I've observed throughout the states that have it. It permits the most participants and brings a level of sophistication and simplicity to the market that I think is really valuable. So a community solar array, at least in the New York definition, is a solar farm that's interconnected to a utility, let's say National Grid.
Okay.
And it generates dollar credits with every kilowatt hour that it produces. Those kilowatt hours are applied against a rate, which in New York is called the VDER rate, the value of distributed energy resources. And that's what generates its dollar credits. In order to access its dollar credits, it has to sign up subscribers to its community solar array, and it has to leave a certain amount of its dollar credits with those subscribers to benefit them. And then the balance can be sent back to the solar developer or asset owner. And the subscribers to that community solar array have to reside within the same utility service territory that the project itself is interconnected to. So that's like the geographic constraint. Like if it's a National Grid project, you got to work with customers that are in the National Grid footprint. If it's a Con Ed project, then it's got to have customers that are in the Con Ed footprint. And now there's further nuances to it. Like the state has obligated you to have at least 60% of your subscribers on that community solar array meet the definition of what's called a mass market customer. That really is meant to sort of require that you address smaller consumers first, and with a larger proportion of your project than larger consumers. And they have implemented like a utility consolidated billing process, which other states have yet to do, that really makes it elegant. So the consumer really just, like, let's say we're offering a 10% of the credits product. That's a very typical structure in New York. Customer subscribes to the array. We size their subscription so that the 10% of our credits that the project produces will equate to roughly 10% of their costs. And instead of them getting all of the credits on their bill and us having to bill them back for 90%, the utility just does the netting for us. They leave 10% with the customer and they send 90% back to the project owner. Other states require that dual billing construct, which is more complicated for customers and sort of creates credit risk and other operational noise that New York doesn't require. So it's actually quite elegant. And so that's the background of like just how community solar works in general.
Hmm.
But being able to take that product and focus it on commercial end users, again, it's like a novelty. Like all the other community solar aggregators in the world are like not doing that. They're focusing very much on the bookends, the resi consumer, and the very large sophisticated, they call them anchor customers, who are investment grade and sign on for 20 years and take down the large proportion of the project that can be allocated to a larger consumer. They're ignoring everybody in the middle who can meet both of those different definitions on the product, on the project, and that's where our focus comes in.
Do you offer shorter contracts?
The community solar subscription agreements are usually not like long term with teeth in them, where there's damages if you leave early, because the risk is low on churn. You could always find another customer who would happily take a 10% discount on their bill. So they usually don't have that lengthy of a commitment. Now, that's not true on retail or on the PPA product, the hosted solar products that we market. For regular way retail, we have customers that are with us both month to month and all the way out to a 3-year commitment. But anytime there's a fixed price, fixed term commitment, it's got to have damages associated with it. It's like we're taking on the market risk from the customer. We're going into the market to hedge that. And so we have risk if the customer goes away, unlike with a community solar subscriber. The risk that we have is different in profile and cost.
What are the other products and solutions that you have in addition to the retail customer and retail tariff plans and the community solar plans? What are the other solutions that you offer the C&I sector?
So the hosted solar solution, we call it our connected microgrid. That's really the next more sophisticated version of decarbonization. And that's where what I was describing before with the farm upstate. That's the thing that they're working on now, is they're going to allow us to use their roof to build a solar array that we own and operate. They don't pay for. And then under that construct, we enter into a power purchase agreement with the customer, a PPA. And that has to be pretty long term, usually 20 or even 25 years, because that's the only way that you can really see the return on the upfront investment in solar in the US. Just the way that the current regulatory regimes are, and even though they vary state by state, it's very front loaded. You have the investment tax credit, which has been enhanced through the IRA, but that's been there for a long time. That's an upfront benefit that you can monetize. And then after that, you've got to hang around with that customer and that project for at least 20 years to see the return on your equity, not just the return of equity. And in order for this to be viable for us to do over and over and to really make a dent in decarbonization, these things have to be economically viable. So I'm not talking about massive returns or crazy margins, but they do need to be sound investments. Otherwise, you're not going to attract the kind of capital that you need to make a dent in this customer segment's emissions. So, we are doing 20 to 25 year contracts with customers on our hosted solar or connected microgrid, as we call them, solutions.
And how is energy storage uptake happening in this space right now?
It is virtually non-existent, which is a huge frustration for me. I see energy storage, as our path to fully transitioning away from fossil or thermal generation. At the moment, the market is just not mature enough from a variety of perspectives to really support the more challenging economics and size and sort of operational considerations of these smaller storage projects. Now, I think that's going to change quickly as more and more battery manufacturers come into the market, the supply chain stabilizes, and folks like us who are in a unique position to take advantage of avoided costs or revenue streams that like a standalone battery developer couldn't do, start to get access to some of that, some of the parts of that supply chain that are more stable for us to work with on the C&I side. We should start implementing batteries in our solar installations in the coming year or two, is my hope. But it just hasn't worked yet.
You do mention about the market conditions and the policy enablers in this context. No, the biggest announcement that came up recently was the Inflation Reduction Act. So, how do you think that's going to help the market in the next few years?
It's going to help the market in the next few years in a variety of ways.
Hmm?
It's not like it was a silver bullet, though. It didn't solve the entirety of the challenges that the solar market has still for being economically viable in the U.S. That being said, it helps, right? So it increased the ITC, which just simply increased that upfront value of the tax credit.
Okay.
It's created, specific communities where there's additional adders available if you build solar there. It's created other adders for American-made, components, which I think is going to be good from just the broader economic purpose of bringing manufacturing back to our shores, but also just having more localized supply chain is good for our local renewables economy in the U.S. But we're still trying to figure out some of the changes that the IRA has created in the tax credit market, namely a concept called transferability.
Hmm.
We're still waiting for IRS guidance on that and how that will really function. But the ability to take the investment tax credit that a project has and to simply transfer it to another party rather than having to do these relatively complex financial gymnastics to implement tax equity is going to be a benefit, pretty significant benefit, I think, for the solar market right now, specifically C&I. The investment tax credit monetization strategies that are used typically, are either generally a partnership flip structure or a sale leaseback or some other sort of financial engineering that allows you to transfer that tax credit to another party. And they're very expensive to implement. They're expensive to close. There's very few participants that are sophisticated enough that offer their participation and have that tax appetite to participate in it. And so if there was a mechanism to transfer the tax credit more freely without so much friction and cost, specifically the C&I solar market would really benefit because those are smaller projects that tend to have, less clear credit underwriting capability. Like there's a customer on a residential side who's got a FICO score. That's easy to underwrite their credit. If you have a customer that's an investment grade host for a solar project, well, that's very easy to underwrite their credit. But all those independent businesses in between require work to underwrite their credit. And having a tax equity participant now also involved in the credit risk taking process, it just adds a whole level of complexity and cost. And frankly, causes a lot of tax equity participants to shy away from C&I. And so, that limits the market of where you could monetize your tax credits for C&I solar in a way that makes it a lot more expensive to do, than the two bookends of the market. Yet another difficulty specific to C&I that I think the IRA's transferability concept will help to alleviate.
It's interesting to note that overall, in the big picture, that's definitely a good sign that the IRA is there. But as you rightly said, there are still nitty gritties in the process, in the system, so that until everything is ironed out, the benefits can definitely not reach the end consumer. So that's a valid point that you make. Now, Gabe, on a final note, you have been in this sector for a long time, and now with catalyst power and the energy sector in general. So, what's your thoughts on how this is going to shape in the next few years? What's your view? And especially with catalyst power, you've done few acquisitions and you also got some funding. So, where do you see things going up in the next few years?
I think that you will find, independent business owners, I hope, start to really get their heads wrapped around the non-monetary benefits of going green. Right now they're very fixated on, upfront savings and, some budget certainty. But there's all the other benefits that come from hosting a distributed solar solution and from going green that are harder to put your finger on. And they need some data and they need some consultants to help them, out there, some think tanks, right, to put together data sets for them to really look at the return on their time for going green differently. One is an obvious one, in my opinion, is that the PR benefits, the public perception benefit of hosting a solar solution, is just one in which, your customer loyalty increases. You probably can make better margins and charge more, but more importantly, you can you can sort of continue doing whatever your business is, knowing that you've now reduced your emissions profile in a way that didn't cost you anything, and your customers who do care about that, will see that.
Hmm.
And then there's always the reliability benefit of hosting distributed solar. I mean, any kind of distributed energy solution that a commercial industrial customer, has experienced the downside of themselves via power outages, losing like a dye lot in a textile manufacturing, facility because the power went out, or food spoilage in a grocery store, when a hurricane came through and power went out. Like, these reliability benefits are hard for people to get their head wrapped around what their little solar project is doing to help it.
Hmm.
But the downside of when those interruptions occur are real, and they've experienced that very acutely. So I think there's an educational gap for both of those non-monetary benefits that the world's pundits and think tanks and those focused on education need to sort of move their focus away from the residential energy transition and focus more on the independent business owner energy transition needs, and getting their understanding well-rounded on these benefits. And once that happens, I think you'll see all of these thousands and thousands of rooftops plastered with solar throughout this country, and that resource needs to be tapped into, and that's what I expect us to see.
I kind of understand that although there is a lot of opportunity in the market, until the consumers are rightly educated and the right solutions are there is a gap between what the market is ready to offer and what the consumers are willing to accept. So I think that is something that you are also personally trying to drive down a message and also offer a solution to the consumers, right?
I think you put it really well. I mean, the gap, that gap is where we're living. We're operating in that gap, and we're trying to make going green, like in bite-sized increments, available to the independent business owner, because I think that incremental change is what they need to sort of to get themselves to the point where they see the value of the time that they have to put into it. And it's not a significant investment in time. We offer a fully financed solution. They don't have to reach in their pockets, so they're not looking at a financial risk. It's just one of time and bandwidth. And I think incremental change is how you can get people there. And those baby steps are what Catalyst Power is able to walk its customers through, because we can start with the product that they need, that they're already buying from us, that makes us relevant on their energy conversation. We have these other baby steps they can take. They can host an EV charging station or two. They can, subscribe to community solar. These are things that do not require a lot of time and bandwidth. And then once they realize the benefits of doing those things, then they can start to see that, oh, okay, well, maybe if I get a little more time and I, give up my roof, which is doing nothing for me today, I can actually be more supportive of the energy transition and more supportive of decarbonization, and realize those benefits for free there as well. So that's our focus, is to live in that educational gap and help our customers take the baby steps that they need to start to decarbonize.
Well, talking of time and conversations, I should definitely thank you for taking time to join me on the podcast today. It was really wonderful providing insights from that part of the market, and especially how you're helping solve a problem that has been not understood or not attended to for a large time. So thanks very much for taking time to join me on the podcast, and wishing a lot of success for Catalyst Power in the future.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
So that was a wrap on yet another interesting conversation. You can find out more about Gabe's work by visiting the website of Catalyst Power. I will leave the links in the show notes section of this episode. While episode 100 is 2 episodes away, the next one will be an interesting one, and to give you a heads up, I will let you know that it is going to be around mobility. I am sure the very mention of mobility would have got a few of you interested. So make sure you subscribe to this show. If you have feedback, again, missionshunya@gmail.com is the ID. I will be back in 2 weeks' time with yet another conversation, which is going to be around mobility. So with that, this is Girish Shivakumar signing off. And as always, thank you for listening.